Welcome back everybody to another MOTOBOB video where you join me at BMW's headquarters in the UK for a look at this, the new 2025 R1300GS Adventure. Now I was actually able to ride it last week on a UK press event, as well as have another little poke around it today, and as you might expect, it's a really accomplished bike. So in this video we'll go through all the best bits with the 9 things that I love about this bike. But before we get started, a massive thanks to Flying Eyes for supporting the channel and sponsoring this video. Flying Eyes make these brilliant frames for your glasses, which are super flexible on the arms. They're made from a material called resiliamide, and so that means they can wrap to the contours of your head and reduce pressure inside the helmet. They're also about 1 millimeter thick at the arms, so they really do slide into the lid easily, and so for me, they're far more comfortable than regular frames. And ever since I've started wearing them, I've never really had those annoying headaches, so I don't think I'll ever go back to regular specs on the bike. They've got a whole bunch of different styles and shapes and sizes and colors. So if you check out their website, you'll find something to suit all tastes, along with some really good accessories like the clip-on sunglasses that just magnetically snap onto the frames, which are really convenient if you do get one of those days where it's a little bit bright sometimes, a little bit shady at others, and so you can quickly and easily switch between without having to take your lid off. So once again, a massive thanks to Flying Eyes for their support, and with that, let's have a look at the bike. You know, I think the first thing that struck me when I jumped on the bike for the press ride last week was just how cocooned and sheltered you are on this bike. Both the bike I was on last week and this bike have the electronically adjustable windscreen, and there's a really nice range of adjustability, as well as it being really easy to control because you can assign it to the rocker switch on the left-hand switchgear, so you can easily put it up and down and control how much airflow you want. Then you've got a variety of different windscreen shapes. I think the bike I was on last week had the standard screen. This one looks a little bit wider, but combined with the little deflectors down the side and also these little deflectors on the top of the handguards, it does a great job of pushing the wind flow around you. And so even though it doesn't look as substantial as a big touring bike like a 1250 RT or something like that, these individual parts all work together to give you a really sheltered riding experience. Then lower down, of course, you've got this massive tank which flares out and gives you plenty of protection around the knees, and also of course the boxer twin, which keeps your lower legs nice and warm. So on an autumnal day like that, I was plenty cozy and didn't really feel cold at all day. So I can see why this bike is something that you might choose if you're looking for an adventure bike that you can really comfortably do all-weather miles on. Now I don't think this one will come as any huge surprise, but it is worth pointing out as well that that 30-litre fuel tank gives you pretty much, I think, in terms of a large capacity bike, the most range on a single tank on the entire motorcycle market. For some people, like the previous generation, that's going to be a huge selling point. And while there are a couple of other 30-litre tank bikes on the market, like the Triumph Tiger Explorers and the Ducati Multistrada V4 Rally, well, even those can't quite compete with this bike because it does run quite a bit more efficiently. I believe that's down to the shift cam tech, so it's got variable valve timing and lift. This is something they use in all of the boxer twin engines now. And so yeah, in the lower revs on a moderate throttle position, it's going to run on that more efficient cam that emphasizes fuel economy and low-end torque. But then also when you give it a fistful of throttle and the revs pick up, it flicks over pretty much seamlessly onto the more aggressive cam, which is going to give you that top-end power. But look, ultimately the result is a lot of mileage on a tank, and again I think that makes it look really appealing as a big adventure tourer. I've also got to say this bike gets a big tick for me when it comes to the comfort stakes, especially in terms of the ride. Naturally it's got their signature telelever front end, which I think gives it this really luxurious ride quality, and it's the latest generation stuff which was first released on the standard R1300GS. Then you've got their dynamic ESA, which is their electronically adjustable semi-active suspension, and so you can get it dialed in to your particular taste, and also it's constantly adjusting it to get the optimal settings in real time. It does a brilliant job of feeling planted and comfortable and stable, but then with the electronic control and also the sort of natural anti-dive of the telelever, it also feels really composed. And of course that's just one of the reasons why the GS and the GS Adventure have always been really good all-rounders. So look, on paper it all sounds fantastic, you know, a big bike with plenty of wind protection, loads of range and a comfortable ride that should make it great over distance. But the trade-off for such a big machine is the fact that it's always going to feel a little bit tricky to manage at lower speeds, and that's why I think the new adaptive ride height is absolutely one of the best features of not only the standard GS, but especially this bike. Now, unfortunately, it is something that you have to pay a little bit extra for as an accessory, but if you're someone who wants a really big comfortable bike, but you may be a little bit intimidated by the stature, then I'd seriously consider allocating a little bit of budget to speccing this feature up. The thing that's so good about it versus some of the other bikes that I've ridden with similar features is just how accurate and seamless it is, because it never seems to forget to lower itself, never accidentally stays jacked up, and it's so refined in the way that it operates that you barely ever notice that it's happening. Take the Triumph Tiger 1200s for example. You have to do it manually with a button on the switchgear, and you often find yourself forgetting to do it, and then you're tiptoeing at the lights, for example. This bike just drops automatically when the speed gets low, and it also does it on both the front and rear shocks, so the whole bike stays level and sags, whereas some of the others only do it on the shock and they end up a little bit sat down at the back. Now again, this is another feature that you can assign to this newish rocker switch on the left-hand switch gear, and you can go between auto, where it goes up and down itself, or you can just stick it in the up mode, which I guess is a good thing if you're potentially like off-roading and you don't want it to sag and reduce your ground clearance when you slow down. Now unfortunately, I've got to have the engine running in order to demonstrate, but this is the bike in the up position, and then when I stick it in auto, you can feel both the back and then the front of the bike sit down. And look, at 5'9" or 175 centimeters, I'm not exactly massively tall, but with the seat in its low position, I can get both my tiptoes down either side, and I feel really confident on this bike. It also means that when you're doing those low speed maneuvers, the whole center of mass of the bike is sitting that bit lower, which can give you some extra confidence. And I already tried this system out plenty on the standard R1300GS and thought it was really good, but I think it's worth double on this bike, especially when the 30-litre tank is fueled up, because it is that much heavier, and also that weight feels like it's sitting a bit higher. The standard GS went on quite a weight loss journey, it's fair to say, for this current generation, whereas this adventure model, they haven't shed quite so much weight. And so yeah, in summary, a great feature and a great way to make a big bike feel manageable. For me, another brilliant feature of both this bike and the standard 1300GS is this new 1300 Boxer Twin, which is a bit more modern and revs up more freely, and also makes a little bit more peak power and peak torque. The defining feature for me that makes it so good to ride is that big flat torque curve in the middle of the rev range, and so there's always plenty of grunt on tap, exactly where you need it for the majority of road riding. So despite the fact that it looks on paper quite a bit down on power versus something like a KTM Super Adventure or a Multistrada V4, in the real world it pulls super strong and rarely ever feels like slow. Perhaps with the extra weight on this bike, it doesn't feel quite so peppy as the standard GS, but still, I'd say there's enough there to have quite a bit of fun on it. In fact, perhaps I'd say that's one of the things that surprised me a little bit about this bike, because I thought it was just going to be a big, heavy adventure bike, whereas actually, out on the road, it does feel quite lively and sporty. I mean, perhaps not in the big picture versus an actual sports bike or a naked or something like that, but probably just versus expectations when you're looking at it. And I think there are a few little additions to this bike that really do help. The up and down quick shifter, which is part of the dynamic pack, gives it a bit of a sporty feel to the gear shifts. And also, this has got their sport brake upgrade, which I think is also part of that pack. And while I wouldn't say it's particularly intense or grabby at the beginning of the lever stroke, there is plenty of power there, and also a nice crispness to how it feels at the lever. Then you've got this double Akropovich silencer, which, you know, it's homologated, so it's not super loud, but it does add a little bit of depth and bass and some little pops and crackles that, you know, gives you that sort of soundtrack that makes you want to ride quicker. Plus, you got to say, it does enhance the looks a little bit. I think it looks better than the smaller single standard silencer. And so yeah, definitely took me by surprise a little bit when you're going through corners and you've got some great Welsh roads, that it can actually, you know, hustle a bit and leave you with quite a big grin on your face. Now, we'll get to the pricing in a minute, but of course this is not a particularly frugally minded bike. It's got a lot of kit to it, so it's never going to be, you know, bargain basement prices. But I will say for this new edition, they have added a few features that now come as standard, and so maybe that can help to soften the blow a bit. So for example, it's now got keyless ignition as standard, which I know it's not for everybody, but I think it makes most sense on a big adventure tourer like this, where you might have a big adventure suit on and you can just leave the key tucked away in your pocket somewhere and you never really have to take it out for stuff like the filler cap or the steering lock. Then you've got heated grips as standard now as well, which is just an absolute must on a bike like this that you're probably going to be wanting to ride in varying weather conditions, although I will say you still have to pay extra for the heated seats, which might not be the case on some other bikes like the Tiger 1200. I like this little phone stash as well in the middle of the tank here. It's a good place to stick your phone if you don't want to mount it on the bars. And then also the auxiliary lights at the front end, well, they're standard too, and I think they help with the looks, and also they're, from a practical perspective, going to give you a bit more visibility as well. One thing you do have to pay extra for though, but I think I might be very tempted to spec it up, is the radar package, which opens up some features like active cruise control, where it follows the traffic in front at a set distance, and blind spot warnings, where you get a little light in the mirror that warns you that there's someone sitting just off behind you. Again, like keyless, this isn't a feature for everybody, but I do think it suits a proper mile-munching bike, and it's just another tool to help ease the mental load when you're on those long motorway rides, especially when the traffic starts to slow down and yo-yo in speed, and it's just easier sometimes to hand over the following to the radar. Blind spot warnings for me are brilliant as well. It's just another little reminder and another little extra help. And the only thing that's a bit of a shame is that one of the more recent safety features from the rear radar isn't available yet in the UK. For both this bike for 2025 and the base 1300GS, they've introduced rear collision warnings, and basically if it detects a car or bike or vehicle approaching quickly from behind, it actually flashes the rear indicators on your bike in the hope to warn that road user and get them to stop before they hit you. Now, it's been approved for use in the EU, but in the UK that hasn't happened yet. But I would assume that's something they're working on and looking at, and so maybe that'll get rolled out to the UK bikes at some point in the future. Now, we're talking about my favorite things about this bike, and so this might be a bit of a controversial one, but I'm gonna say the styling has really started to grow on me, especially as I've started to see the bike more in the flesh and spent a bit of time riding it. I think I said this in a previous video, but the red bike that they used for all the press shots when they announced this new model was possibly the one that really emphasized the shape of the tank most, because it has silver here, red at the front, and it just makes it look very blocky indeed, which I don't think is as much of the case on something like this, which is the triple black, which is more multiple shades of dark grey and black. I'd say the same as well for the Option 719 green version. That one doesn't look quite as intense in the blockiness either. And the bike that I was riding the other day was the GS Trophy, and look, while it isn't necessarily the most subtle or stealthy, I do think in some of the footage and in some of the pictures it does look quite good. So look, that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of my favourite things about this bike. Maybe we'll get one for a bit longer next year so we can do some more thorough testing, but on first impressions it's a brilliant bike to do a lot of mileage on, and like I say, surprised me a little bit with how playful it is. The only major sticking point for me is always going to be the price, which is always going to be the case on a well-spec premium bike like this from one of the major manufacturers, and so even a model without all the bells and whistles like this is starting at just under 19 grand, whereas this one, well, it's well over 20, which puts it out of reach for the majority of bikers. Still, if you look at what it does and how it performs and all of the features, if you have got that sort of money for a bike, then I can see how you can justify it. And realistically, when you look at the Super Adventure S, the Tiger 1200s, especially the Multistrada V4, they're all up around this price point, so it is pretty much par for the course. As always though, I'd love to know what you think of it, so do let me know down in the comments below. And also, which bike would you go for, the GS Adventure or one of the other 30-litre tank bikes like the Tiger Explorers or the Multi V4? If you want something a little bit more compact, then I'll also put my review of the standard GS on the screen now, so you can give it a click and give it a watch in case you haven't already. And I'd thoroughly recommend hitting subscribe if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle reviews like this right here on MOTOBOB. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.